On November 1st, 1179, 14-year-old Capetian Prince Philip was anointed and crowned at the Cathedral of Reims as the only son and successor of his elderly father, King Louis VII, who died a year later, and Adele of Champagne. As King Philip II, he was dubbed Philip Augustus by the contemporary chronicler Rigaud of Saint-Denis, apparently for both having been born in the month of August and augmenting the commonwealth of France in a way reminiscent of the Roman Caesar. When Philip acceded to the throne, half of France was in the hand of Plantagenet King Henry II of England. Henry had gained a considerable amount of French land through his marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine, the queen who happened to be the ex-wife of Philip's own father Louis. Their rivaling sons were significant figures in Philip's expansion of his kingdom. According to Rigaud's glowing account of Philip's wars with his vassals, in the first year of the reign of Philip Augustus and the 15th of his age, there arose rivalries or enmities among the princes of the realm. Certain of his princes, at the instigation of the devil enemy to ecclesiastical peace, dared to conspire against their lord Philip Augustus. They assembled an army and began to waste the king's lands. The most Christian King Philip, seeing this, was seized by a great fury, and led against them an army of infinite multitude, so that after a few days he put them all to flight and pursued them with such strength and vigor that, by God's miraculous aid, he reduced them all to obedience and most powerfully compelled them to perform his whole will. Before leaving his domain for the Third Crusade, Philip made the Testament of 1190 to provide for France's governing in his absence. Along with many other nobles, including Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, Philip Augustus and Henry and Eleanor's son, King Richard I, known as the Lionheart, set out on a mission to drive the Muslims from the seaport of Acre on the Palestinian coast and defeat Saladin. When Philip and Richard met at Sicily, they had a meeting at Messina, and there made a treaty concerning the territory in France. Previously, Richard, who spent most of his lifetime in France and had once been close friends with Philip, had allied with the French king against his own father Henry II, because he feared there was a scheme to pass the crown to his younger brother John instead of to himself. But the vicissitudes and tensions of politics ran high. The increasing divisiveness that took place between the two kings was evident even when they were allies on the crusade and took opposite sides in the dispute over the kingship of Jerusalem. Through the Treaty of Messina, Richard was able to cancel his betrothal to Philip's half-sister Alice and keep the Norman Vexin in exchange for 10,000 silver marks of Troyes. The fortresses at Epta were only to return to France if Richard died with no direct male heirs, an event which Richard did not foresee happening. Both kings fell ill while working in the Middle East, and when Philip Augustus learned that his child heir was sick back at home and that the succession of Flanders was up for settlement, he returned to France. Nine years later, Richard the Lionhearted was dead, and John of Lackland was King of England. Philip Augustus determined to finally conquer the Angevin Empire, confiscated King John's northern French territories for defying his overlordship. Furious, John sought to raise money to strengthen his military by imposing extra taxes and even extorting fees from the widows of his vassals if they refused to marry the men that the king preferred. This memorably backfired after the conflict climaxed with Philip Augustus's victory in 1214 at the Battle of Bouvines. John's barons afterward forced him to sign the Magna Carta at Runnymede in June 1215, a significant moment in political history in which it was documented that a king could not be above the law. An eyewitness known as Anonymous of Betunia wrote of the battle. The traditional political system at this time featured a central government run by an ambulatory royal court, and local governments run by stationary officials. In their comparative study of the administrations of Philip II and Henry I, historians C. Warren Hollister and John W. Baldwin observe, an expanded domain led Philip Augustus to produce 4 innovations matching those of Henry I: fixed archives, a financial court of audit, traveling justices, a vice-regency. Philip experimented adding the new position of baillie to the court to extend the benefits of royal justice throughout the domain, and to watch out for judicial fines owed to the king. At the beginning of his reign, Philip initiated the captio, a forcible seizure of Jewish debts for repayment to the crown, which some scholars have identified as a method thereafter used by the Capetians to exploit Jewish subjects. At this time Jews were becoming associated with money lending and any corruption present in that vocation. Subsequent to the captio was a mass expulsion of Jews from the French domain. They constituted a tiny minority generally concentrated in Paris, as it was, and in the next decade Philip readmitted them along with providing guidelines for their money-lending trade. It is typical to see conflicting elements of personality strongly influence politics, and in the life of Philip Augustus we have a particularly baffling and extreme example. 3 years after Philip's first wife Isabelle of Hainaut died from childbirth complications in 1190, he married the 18-year-old Danish princess Ingeborg, which was a rather puzzling choice from a political standpoint, although the enormous dowry of 10,000 silver marks would certainly benefit an ambitious warrior king. At their marriage she was given the name Isambur, but the day after the wedding, Philip, due to some uncertain cause, the excuse was bodily reasons, suddenly loathed the woman and wanted an annulment. This would not be something to easily get away with as soon as the ground-breaking papacy of Innocent III was installed. He was the first pope to have studied law as well as theology. Ingeborg was subsequently treated more like a hostage than a queen of France, which grieved her and insulted Denmark. In a letter to Pope Innocent III, Ingeborg pleaded, "Set me free from those who hate me, so that I shall not drown in the deep waters, since I am being pursued for no reason. It is my master and husband Philip, the famous king of the French, who wishes to scoff at my youth. Through isolation in prison he continues to torment me through his men, so that I shall conform to his wishes against the law of marriage and the law of Christ. I suffer from innumerable and unendurable indignities." Philip refused to live with Ingeborg and kept her in a monastery for 7 years. When he repeatedly failed to get his marriage to Ingeborg formally dissolved, Philip finally agreed to let Ingeborg reign as Queen of France in 1213. In the meantime he had had 2 children by a marriage to Agnes of Morania, which the Pope had not recognized. On his deathbed Philip acknowledged the injustice he had shown to Ingeborg, and he asked his son Louis, who would eventually reign as Louis VIII of France, to treat her well. Some historians have determined that the consequences of Philip Augustus's achievements were not fully realized until the more celebrated reign of his popular grandson Louis IX, and therefore the influence of this last King of the Franks and first King of France was not entirely comprehended by his contemporaries.